Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Mastering Short-Term Rental Ordinances, Essential Tips for Texas Government Leaders. My name's Corinne Aycock, and I'm with Avenue, who's been serving state and local governments for 40 years now to help recover revenue and provide software solutions that help streamline administration. Now, with the short-term rental boom, we've also been helping local governments build strong compliance and administration programs. But before you can do that, there's a crucial step you've got to take, which is having an effective ordinance in place. And that's our focus today. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our presenters who know the ins and outs of this topic. First off, we have our special guest, Gus Roman. Gus has 28 years of municipal experience with Bryan, San Marcos, and currently College Station, where he serves as the Assistant Director of Services and manages code enforcement. He's also served 2 terms on the board of directors for the Texas Municipal League. But more importantly, for today, Gus has firsthand experience in developing effective short-term rental ordinances. Welcome, Gus, and thanks for being with us today.
Thanks. Pleasure.
And we have Avenue's Brandy Sanner, who is the account executive for Texas. Now, Brandy's a guru when it comes to understanding taxes and ordinances. Before joining Avenue, Brandy managed a large team of auditors who supported 30 tax collectors. And she spent 2 years serving as a local tax collector herself, giving her a very unique perspective on today's topic. Welcome, Brandy, and thanks for being here.
Oh, excited.
You guys are going to be our dynamic duo today, and we've got a lot of ground to cover. So today we're going to cover all things Texas when it comes to short-term rental ordinances. So, and you're going to hear a lot. We're going to use the term STR also. So today's agenda, so you'll see STR a lot, which is short code for short-term rental ordinance or short-term rental. We're going to cover various stages of regulatory compliance and some important court rulings in Texas. And of course, we're going to have practical tips and strategies for developing effective ordinances. We're going to wrap up with a Q&A session at the very end. So please use the chat feature and ask your questions along the way, and we'll do our very best to get to all of them at the end. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our presenters who are going to get us started. Brandy?
Oh, thank you, Corinne, so much. Super excited to be here with Gus today, and we're going to talk to you about ordinances as relates to Texas. And so really to get us kicked off here, I'd like to talk about kind of why we're even talking about this, the rise of short-term rentals. I mean, Gus, like 5 years ago, were we even talking about short-term rentals? Like,
No, not really. I mean,
it wasn't even.
and it just blossomed with Airbnbs and VRBOs. And when we saw a big spike is when our university, we're the home of Texas A&M University, when we joined the SEC, and we had the Johnny Manziel years that really blew up people wanting to come to A&M for the football games.
No doubt, no doubt. So let's just kind of put some data with what we're talking about. Obviously, there's been a huge boom, but what that looks like is in the STR market, you can see on the screen 1,500% growth in the market. So this is the number of properties. It's just booming. The nightly rates are even up. Since 2020, we've got over an 18% increase in the nightly rates of the rooms. There's over 125 web platforms. I'm sure you know the top 2 or 3 or 4, your Airbnb, VRBO, but there's 125 platforms and growing where these properties are able to list and advertise. We've also seen a huge spike with the number of complaints related to short-term rental properties. So 239%, that's a lot. And there's 27 global markets that have seen STRs outperform their hotels. That's wild. That's crazy to me. So Gus, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball here. I want to play a little game. Okay. This next slide is going to have some photos of the most expensive Airbnb property in the world. So if you had to take just kind of a shot in the dark guess at what the nightly rate for this property is, what would you guess? And for those that have joined live, if you want to drop your guess into the chat feature, that'd be fun.
I'm guessing somewhere around 10,000 a night.
10,000 a night. Yeah, so obviously it's a beachfront property. It looks kind of cool. So I guess I'll give the drum roll and we'll change the slide and reveal that it is $38,000
God.
a night. That's insane to me. So I couldn't afford to live there. That one night is kind of like the average salary where I'm from. So this is crazy. But anyway, so the properties you can see they're very, very pricey. And what we're looking at now, and Gus, you're right in the ground zero here for Texas, but this is the state of Texas, and we call this a heat map. So the areas in red are obviously more dense for short-term rental properties. Um, but you can see they are throughout the entire state. And again, this market is growing. So let's put a little bit of data behind this. So you see the visual, the number of properties and the amount of revenue associated with these properties was pretty mind blowing for me. So on the next slide there, we will have the number of properties that you see here on the screen and the associated revenues. So would you guess it's a $10.5 billion industry in Texas for
That's
the
crazy.
operators? That's a
That-
nice side hustle. Crazy to me. So it's 145,694 properties today and growing. As you can see in the last year, we've seen an added 19,303 properties statewide. And the effects to city leaders like you, Gus, the revenue is the occupancy tax revenue associated with those listings is $631 million.
Yeah, and I mean, for us, we've seen it grow, especially since we started creating the ordinance, and I guess we might go into that later on, but how we've seen our revenue increase.
Mhm.
A
So
number of
you have
properties
seen
that-
some drastic increases.
Yes, we did. More than we ever expected, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So let's talk for a minute about why short-term rentals are kind of a love-hate relationship. Some love them, some hate them. We find that they are popular with folks like tourists. Myself, I personally, when I travel with my children, I would rather have a whole house than pile everybody into a hotel room. So they're very popular with tourists. Investors and real estate brokers, for obvious reasons, you can turn a non-commercial property into a really nice side hustle. The market's very strong for it right now. Another player in this industry is the listing platforms. I mean, we know the big ones, the big three or four, but there's 125 folks out there that are brokering these transactions. And governmental officials, they're on here as they are popular with the governmental officials, but they also have the group that it's not so popular with, or maybe it's again a love hate relationship. But the reason that the government officials um, do favor SCRs in a big way is the revenue. Like we just said, there's a lot of tax revenue associated with these properties. So, on to the reason that they are unpopular, or the folks they're unpopular with, neighbors. If you have an STR as a neighbor or in your backyard, you probably aren't happy with that. The hotel industry, and Gus, I know you personally had some experience with this. It's not always an equal playing field when there's lack of ordinance and governance when it comes to short-term rentals, and I think the hotel industry has taken some exception with that. Affordable housing, it does affect the home prices in neighborhoods, and it makes it difficult to find affordable places to live. And then obviously the governmental officials are on this slide as well, because for all these named reasons and what we're going to go into detail next on, it can cause some serious problems within the cities to regulate and to govern the STRs with this level of growth.
Yeah, for us, it was that the biggest one was the hotel industry saying, "Hey, it's not fair. That why are we having to pay hotel motel tax, the hot taxes that everybody loves, while these folks get away with taking our business away and then not paying the tax?"
Yeah,
And then being over code enforcement, we also started getting complaints from the neighbors saying, "Hey, something's going on every weekend. There appears to be cars from out of state." And so our code enforcement officers, unknowing if they were short-term rentals or not, would have to work on weekends to go in there and take a look and see.
absolutely. Noise and public safety, that's another big one. And these things on the slide really illustrate a lot of the reasons that the cities were driven to build out their local ordinances. So You have occupancy issues, density issues. Again, if you have these people in your backyard or next door, you're going to have traffic and parking. By who do you call when somebody's parked in your driveway that doesn't belong there? Lots of offensive activities that occur. There's a historic and cultural impact, and all these things really do drain the community services and resources. I mean, you've got your phone calls going into all the governmental officials, and your police are sometimes having to be dispatched for a minor complaint. So, of this, Gus, like any of this kind of drive you to building out your ordinances the way that you did?
It does. I mean, I've got so many stories. We had one that we didn't realize was a short-term rental, and it was somebody that had rented one and then actually held a concert. They had a professional group come down, set up stage and everything in the front yard of this property, uh, and decided to do a concert and invite their 200 closest friends.
No way.
And so when the owner of the property found out, they were like, well, that's not what yeah. There's a lot of those kinds of issues that pop up. I mean, for us, it's neighborhood integrity. It's being making sure that the permanent residents are comfortable with short-term rentals being in their neighborhood, that we know where they are. And then again, something we'll cover later on is knowing who to contact in case we do have issues at the property. I mean, that's one of the biggest perks of having the short-term rental program, and being an SEC school with, our stadium holds 102,000 people, those 7, 8 home games, and then all the other events that we have here in College Station, not only with A&M related, but also tourists coming to the George Bush Library. We have, and being right in the center of Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, and then San Antonio, Austin, we're within probably an hour and a half, 2 hours of the majority of the Texas population, and 3 or 4 biggest cities.
Yeah. So, I mean, being a college town and obviously a destination center as well, do you see a lot of party houses and things like that?
We do, and that's part of something that needs to be considered when you're writing the ordinance. Have some sort of where you can pull the permit if they don't adhere to the rules. We've cited visitors, which that's the last thing we want to do when they won't listen or they won't behave. And we want them to come. Obviously, we want visitors to come to College Station and to spend money. Go to our games, go to our shops, go to our restaurants. We get property, we get sales tax, but behave. That's the one thing that we want them is to behave and be. We want to be good hosts, and we also want them to be good visitors to the community.
Right, absolutely. And I want to talk about the various stages of compliance, and we're going to move to a case study on College Station, which I find incredibly interesting. And this is, your story from starting out at stage one and going through the process of building out your ordinances, kind of what your challenges were. And so I would love for you, Gus, just to kind of maybe walk us through day one, when you went from not really talking about STRs to, oh my goodness, we have a problem. And throughout the course of the evolution of your governance, where you landed today. So if you wouldn't mind, just talk us through College Station as being the poster child for STR governance.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it, a poster child. We were having issues, and there were some long-term residents that were having problems with short-term rentals in their property. So City Council asked us to address it. Probably one of the longest one of the longest or hardest things to do is to get an ordinance in place that makes sense, that's fair to everyone. We do want the visitors, we do want the short-term rentals, but we want to make sure that they're controlled. So making the real estate investors, the list that you had up before of real estate investors, make the residents that want to make a little money on the weekends, and then have places for people to come and stay. Walk that fine line in between everybody. You're not going to make everybody happy, but for us, it all started back in 2019, and we had stakeholder meetings with the hotel motel industry, with the real estate group here in town, even the apartment associations, very, very influential groups in College Station. And we're kind of a little bit of a fluke being a college town that most 60% of our property, our rental or residential property is for rent, long-term rent. So we have a program for long-term rental registration as opposed to the short-term, where currently we have about 9,000 properties already registered in the long-term program. So we kind of dovetailed onto that. And we actually had to have 3 council meetings over the span of about 3-4 months to tweak the ordinance. We said, here's what we found other cities are doing, and this is what we recommend. And then the city council said, well, what about this? And then the real estate committee said, well, what about this? So kind of massaging and trying to get into the middle comfort zone for everybody is when we finally came up with the ordinance. That took a while, including some sort of grandfathering clause. Would be a good thing. That's something that came up because we've had people that actually buy homes just for short-term rental. It's a
Right.
good investment when you can get basically you can pay your mortgage for the entire year with 2 weekends. For an Alabama or an LSU home game, when you can charge $1,000 a night for a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom house,
Oh,
that'll
wow.
come your payment, and you have the equity, and then some other occasional. So those folks, we want to make sure that they were taken care of. We did not want anything to fall through the cracks. And then, of course, the court cases that we're going to talk about here in a little while, that kind of threw a little mix into it. There we had to pivot, and Gumby is our office mascot, and I actually have a little Gumby statue here in my office
I
that
love it.
you have to stay flexible and understand that you're not going to hit it
Yeah,
100% the
no
first,
doubt.
and then modified it to where now it makes a little bit more sense.
Sure. So when you started seeing the increase in the short-term rental properties, did that correlate with a decrease in your occupancy tax because maybe folks weren't staying at hotels as much, or?
No, not really. The demand just seems to keep growing, and
Mhm.
I can understand somebody wanting to come down with their entire family and wanting having to rent a bank of rooms as opposed to one house where everybody can stay together. We
Mhm.
have a lot of very deep traditions at A&M. The Aggie Ring. If there are any Aggies out there, they understand what the Aggie Ring is, and when the student gets their Aggie Ring after 90 hours credit hours at A&M, it's a big deal. I mean, there are people
Sure.
that fly in from all over the world, family members, when they get their Aggie Ring. It's almost akin to graduation. Multiple
Mhm.
graduations a year, where it's a family thing. Games. We've have folks that just come down for the home games and feel more comfortable in a house instead of a hotel. They have better for them, more
Absolutely.
comfortable. But yeah, it's been a challenge, but it's also been very educational for us to understand the market that's out there for short-term rentals.
Sure. So I want to go in a moment to kind of stage 1, stage 2, and walk through that. But before we do that, I just want you to kind of talk through some of the data at the bottom of this slide to kind of illustrate some of the results that you've gotten when you started really kind of taking a handle over governing your STR program.
Yeah, when we started the long-term registration program, which started back in 2000, I want to say 2011, been about
Hmm.
10, 12 years. Uh, Through experience with that, we took over that program about 8 years ago, and then one of the things we put on the application was, "Are you short-term renting this property?" So when the short-term rental ordinance came into place, we call it game day because that's typically what we go around. Uh, and so that was our first four. I think it was only about 40 properties that had checked. Yeah, we do this for game days.
Hmm.
We didn't have a short-term rental ordinance at that place, so the first 40 were easy. But then our administrative staff would be researching other properties to see if they were short-term rentals on Airbnb, like the top 3 or 4. We had no idea how many um, different websites there are. I mean, there's even a website for SEC schools
Oh,
that's
wow.
just dedicated to SEC schools and short-term rentals in SEC schools. So that was one of the greatest things, that one of the aha moments for us was there's services like the ones that Avenue provide that they'll scrape and go out and do all this research for you. And we were finding out that it was taking an inordinate amount of time with our staff to find these, and then to collect the evidence and to get all the metrics and everything that come with um, with with the websites that are out there, and when they're available, when they're not available, and the rates,
Oh, yeah.
and are they paying their taxes as they should. But for us, like the slide says, we found about 250. We're up to about 260 now
Oh,
that
wow.
we have registered. It's actually gone up about 4 or 5 this last week.
Hmm.
And then also the process of doing the first reaching out is something that was taking an inordinate amount of time for our staff as well. So part of the services that Avenue provides for us is to go out there and do the first touch, to send out a letter, make the first phone call, and then if they don't gain compliance or they don't contact us, then they send it to us and say, okay, code enforcement, now you have to go after them with some teeth. And that's
Yeah.
something else that needs to be included in the ordinance. You got to have some teeth behind it to either cease and desist, sign up and start paying your taxes, or we're going to cite you and send you to court. And it's very rare that we've had to go. That's the last thing we want to do is cite somebody.
Sure.
Um,
No, compliance is where the value is for sure.
Compliance, that's all we want is compliance with anything we do in code enforcement. We really would rather not write citations or go to court with you, but that's that's the teeth you got to have to make sure that ordinances work.
Sure.
For us, as far as the newfound occupancy tax, that's right around, we're about 500,000 so far in the last 3 years. And I have the actual spreadsheet here in front of me. For about 3 years, we're figuring we're going to have about $8 million in sales with short-term rentals. And given the first 6 months of 2023, we're expecting that 530 to grow to about 715 by the end of the calendar year for us.
Oh, by December. Wow, gosh,
By the end of December. So it's a good investment, return on investment for us. And it also freed up a lot of our staff time to do their other duties, the normal duties with everything else that we do here in the office.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So if you could kind of categorize the process in stages, stage one being maybe folks don't have a local ordinance and their code may or may not allow STRs. Stage two, maybe you have an ordinance in place, but you don't have the data like you were talking about, the property records and the identification on the properties and little to no enforcement. Maybe stage three is you have an ordinance in place and you have data maybe, but you're still having trouble kind of governing that, and compliance is still an issue, things like that. And then stage four, we'll just call that smooth sailing, where you've kind of got everything rolling the way it should. Compliance is up, revenue's up. So what did that look like for you guys as you walked through those stages where you found yourself with no ordinance? How difficult was it to just get the ordinance in place?
That was probably the most painful part. I hate to use that term, but just creating an
Sure.
ordinance that was fair to everybody, like I mentioned before. And then, like again, you're not going to please everybody, but everybody's got to understand that, yeah, we need to know where these are, and we need to be able to regulate them and have them pay their fair share of
Hmm.
property taxes, of hotel motel tax here in the community. There's that fine line between investors, the residents, and then the visitors to the city that you got to walk when you write the ordinance for it. For the stage two for us, we did put the ordinance in place, and we had the original data, the original 40 from our long-term rental registration program. And then that's when we realized that finding them was going to be so difficult. We had no idea how much time consuming that was going to be. We have two
Absolutely.
admins that helped us, and probably half the time was just trying to find these and gather the evidence for them.
Hmm.
Then once stage three for us was we found the data and were able to get to it, and then it was the outreach and getting them to respond. And then that was taking up a lot of time for us. And then stage four is, of course, we brought y'all on board, and now it's smooth sailing. I mean, we basically communicate with y'all twice a month on occasion, on a regular basis, and y'all say, here are the ones we found, and these are the ones that have responded. These are the ones that don't. Code enforcement officers take them and go to town and enforce the ordinances that are in the books.
Yeah. And I think and I hear that across the board with different city leaders that I visit with. It's kind of how do you build ordinances that are kind of a do no harm,
Mhm.
method, or what creates a win-win-win for everyone? And really, just exactly what you did there in College Station. and it varies city to city. You have to identify what your problems are, where your pain points are, the things you need to fix, and that would probably be, maybe a good starting point when you're building out your ordinances. Is that kind of the direction you took?
Yeah, original ordinance, after going to council 3 times and tweaking it and massaging it to where it was, we actually divided it up into 3 different types, STR 1, 2, 3, where one was just a regular bed and breakfast. There were very, very few of those where
Mm-hmm.
the owner had to be on property or lived on property full time. Then we had those that were in certain zonings that the resident had to live at the property but did not have to be there when they were there. And then we had a third one which was in different types of zonings, and the owner did not have to live on property. Basically, the investors that just bought for short-term rentals. And then that court case, which one of the ones we'll mention later on, kind of said, now you can't do that. And so we had to go back and do another modification to the ordinance, and took advantage of the that change to do a little more tweaking. And the best plans, you're going to have to keep massaging until you get it to the place where you want. And I'm sure in a year or two, we're probably going to look at the ordinance and go, hey, we need to change this just a little bit more, and go back to council and justify that.
And I think that's part of the process for everybody. I mean, when you come out the gate, really, you want to establish your foundational ordinance. I mean, I see most people saying, I really right now, I just need to get them registered. So they come out the gate with a very scaled down, simple ordinance just to establish registration requirements. And then they have to, maybe every year go back and adjust it as they see how their program behaves with that ordinance. So you mentioned those court cases, and I just want to talk about them briefly. Zatari versus the city of Austin, as well as the city of Grapevine versus Munns. Those 2 court cases on merit were kind of designed around completely banning STRs. There were some cities that wanted to ban STRs. The STR community prevailed on both of those cases. And then the third one, the Hynell Stark versus the city of New Orleans, was a really monumental case. Went all the way to the Supreme Court. I think it was talked about nationwide. And my understanding is that the city of New Orleans wanted to, their issue that drove their ordinance draft was too many STRs. It was very, very dense. So I think a mechanism they put in place was to try to say that the only STRs they could permit were owner occupied. And so I know you had mentioned that one particularly affected you and maybe had to cause you to have to rethink some of your ordinances. So talk to us about that for a minute.
Yeah, when that came down back last, I want to say October of last year, our legal department took a look at it, and it was actually brought to our attention by y'all. And we were the ones, and we sent it to our legal department and said, yeah, we'd heard about this, and there can be no more 1, 2, 3s. It's basically everything. If it's a residential property, you can have short-term rental, unless if it's an HOA restriction, which we don't enforce those. That's up to the HOA to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it actually did us a favor because it simplified what we do and what we need to short-term rental. There was a lot of questions about, well, I sometimes am there and sometimes I'm not. I didn't hear about the grandfathering clause because I live out of state. And I think if I recall, the city of New Orleans Fifth Circuit, basically the win for the short-term rentals was that it was an out-of-state owner that said, I live in Delaware or wherever, and you're interfering with interstate commerce because I live somewhere else and I'm doing commerce with in the state of Louisiana. And I think that's when the court said, yeah, basically, if you want to do a short-term rental, you can do a short-term rental. Made our life easier because now we don't have to try to pigeonhole which short-term rental 1, 2, 3. It's all or nothing.
Yeah, I could see where just trying to kind of manage that would have been a lot of extra work for sure. So, yeah, and I think that court case really affected a lot of folks across the country. And like you said, it simplified things. It really clarified that was definitely, that was one of the core issues was interstate commerce. So
yeah, and there was a couple of folks that had that was their retirement. And we had one lady that was in tears saying, I didn't know that this ordinance had passed, even though we put it out everywhere. And this is my retirement. I invested in this property, and we can't, you missed the grandfathering period. So when this came up, she was incredibly happy that okay, you're good to go.
Mhm.
Please go forward.
Definitely, definitely. So, while we have you today, I want to just take an opportunity to walk through just some tips. If we have cities that, and I've actually spoken with so many cities, just even just this year, we've just been really, really busy with people paying attention to short-term rentals, and they're at the very beginning. They're at phase one. They're sitting down at the table with the stakeholders, the STR associations, and the council, and various people to try to draft their ordinances for the first time. So I wanted to use this opportunity to share some tips of things that you have thought about and things that we have heard other cities have done with their ordinances that may help some of the folks on the webinar today. So again, like I said earlier, licensing and permit registration requirements, that's kind of one of the out the gate first things you want to do is establish a registration requirement. So in that, many folks are inside of the language of the ordinance requiring things like you have to register with my office, you have to include your the owner's name, designated contact person
Mhm.
for this property, various different things that they're asking for safety requirements and inspections, fire marshal, things like that, just to make sure the property is safe. And sometimes there is also a checklist of things like we're going to need to be sure you have a state sales tax registration or ownership information, or maybe even something with your homestead exemption, with your with the property tax, things like that. So, what does your registration requirement look like for College Station?
Well, we were lucky that we had already done the long-term rental registration,
Uh huh.
and so we basically mirrored it off of that as far as the requirements. The one thing we did add was the safety inspection because we were being code enforcement. We get a lot of calls from people that had rented a property online, and when they got there, it wasn't as the pictures promised, and they had all sorts of issues, and they would call us, and so we didn't have the contact information. So we require contact information. If you don't live within 30 miles of the city hall, you have to give us somebody local that can be at the property within half an hour in case there's an issue.
And
Um,
that's in your ordinance?
that's in the ordinance. That's
Nice.
part of the ordinance. We also do, like we said, the safety where it's a basic list. I mean, the inspection is something that takes 5-10 minutes. You got to have make sure working smoke detectors, working carbon monoxide detector, and then a fire extinguisher per floor. If it's a 2-story or 3-story home, um, the safety requirements, and then document submissions. Make sure that they're actually they know that their property is being short-term rental. We've had a couple of very creative students or student groups that lease a house, and then they took it upon themselves to then short-term rental without the property owner knowing.
Oh,
Um, and so we've sent out letters and contact them. They go, wait a minute, I'm not short-term renting. That must be the student. So that's something that we kind of try to address as it comes up
yeah.
as
And
well.
so I just thought about this, but if you have someone who comes in and rents a short-term rental property in College Station, and maybe there weren't proper safety precautions taken and they had a bad experience, how does that affect the image of the city
It
with that
does.
experience with your tourists?
Exactly. I mean, if you go to whatever city and or whatever area, or let's say you go to Mexico or somewhere else, and you have a bad experience, you're going to say, you're going to put a big blanket over, don't go to San Juan, Puerto Rico, because I had a bad experience at this hotel. Well, no, it was just that one hotel.
Right.
And so now being more comfortable that we have inspected this property. It's on our website. There's a link where we actually have all the locations of the registered short-term rentals where they can check. It has to be on the website. If they're putting it on Airbnb, the license number has to be out there.
Hmm.
So we want to make sure that if you do come to College Station as a tourist or as a visitor, that you have a good experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, kind of complementary to that conversation, the renewal process. So, I mean, when you register, typically folks have to come and renew that on an annual basis, and make sure their safety inspections are up to date and things like that. Which to me, it kind of holds those SDRs to the same standard as your hotel industry, which is wonderful. It's fair for them.
Mhm.
But for that annual renewal process, as they're going through that, a lot of cities build into their ordinance annual fees and renewal fees and interest and penalty and things like that. So it's one thing just not to forget about, because as the collector of occupancy tax, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're doing all the things that Gus has done. And you can tell us, Gus, about the amount of resources it took you to get where you are, just administrative costs.
Yeah.
So sometimes these annual renewal fees are very helpful for the cities in kind of covering some of those expenses. So, I mean, what does your renewal process look like?
Well, for us, it's once a year, and if we have no issues with the property, we didn't get any code complaints about loud parties or anything else, then we allow them to self-certify
Mm-hmm.
the inspection. As far as the costs, I can get those. The city has, or city council or city charter says that we have to have a cost recovery. So whatever it costs us to manage a program, we have to recover the cost of that. We're not in it to make money, but we're not in it to lose money either.
Sure.
And so trying to figure out what the fees should be was kind of a little bit of a challenge, but we come up with something I think is fair and that is doable. I mean, some of these rentals are going for, like you said, $250, $260 a night. To be able to do that and do it legally is worth, I think it's $100 our permit fee for it, and same thing with our renewals.
Yeah. And some cities that we have met with have density issues, as you could see on the right side of the map, or as normal people say, the east side of Texas. There was a very bright red area, so there's a lot of STR density there. So built into your ordinance, if that is one of the big rocks that you have to climb over, you can build into your ordinances zoning requirements and density restrictions that do help you kind of alleviate that problem. I don't think you necessarily have that in your ordinance, Gus.
No, not really. Originally, we did have based on zoning, but again, the court case kind of took care of that and simplified our process substantially.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've seen some cities do that, and we have some examples of what that looks like, and it can be helpful in limiting how many STRs are in on a block, or in a certain area, or making certain areas off limit for STRs and things like that. So definitely something to consider in your ordinances. And you mentioned this a minute ago, advertising parameters. So it's very important when the property has identified themselves with the city, they've registered, they've become compliant, to have them include that license or registration number in their online listing. So for example, in Airbnb, if you're scrolling through and you want to search out properties, you as a city, or even me as a consumer, I may want to just make sure I want to stay at properties that are compliant with the city. So signage, things like that. That's other things to consider when you're drafting your ordinances. And so for College Station, do you have the requirement for their license number to be displayed?
We do. Yes,
Yeah.
we do. It has to be on there. And then also inside the property, they have to post a flyer, be it in the kitchen counter or somewhere, where it shows the local emergency contact information. If they have an issue with fire, police, whatever, those numbers, how to contact the property owner immediately for the people that are visiting, as well as some of the rules that don't. The big three for us are: don't park where you shouldn't be parking, don't create too much noise, and don't create excessive trash, because then that's going to cause code enforcement to come down and look and say, okay, this is unacceptable. And again, neighborhood integrity is one of the things that we look for.
Absolutely. Very important. And I want to talk about this for a minute, because we've actually visited with some cities that may have built out beautiful ordinances, and they have compliances up, revenues are up, registrations are up, everything seems like it's going great. But when somebody decides not to follow those rules and they need to take enforcement action, they actually had to step back and say, wait a minute, we forgot to include that piece in our ordinance.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have a way to enforce what we've built out. So that's a really important piece of this. So the ability to apply penalties for violations, or a popular one that I'm hearing getting a lot more traction is the 3 strikes you're out. So if you have a certain number of violations and you're able to track those through a centralized place, and you can attach that to the property record and prove there's been 3 violations for parking or parties or whatever it is, you have the authority to revoke their permit or not renew their permit as that time comes. So what does that look like for College Station?
It's pretty much all three of those are covered.
You have all these.
Yeah, we have all those. We as part, as I said, part of having a short-term rental in College Station, you have to post what you're not supposed to be doing when you come and visit. And most people do understand that, but occasionally I have those groups that come in and just think it's a short-term rental. I'm going to tear it up. And ordinance actually protects the property owner, because if there are issues, we immediately notify them, and they can notify the Airbnb, whoever it is that they're advertising to, and say, you need to blackball these people. That there's no way that they should be renting property. I mean, they tore up my home, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of them have come to realize that they should check their insurance policies to make sure that they're allowed to get do short-term rental. Sometimes the insurance company will say, well, in your policy on page 777, Article B, whatever, it says this property is not to be short-term rental, and then they're stuck with having to fix all the damage at their property. And then again, last thing we want to do is try to fine anybody, but we will if we have to, if they don't make an effort to remedy the situation. And we have cited illegally parked vehicles for home games that just decide I can park anywhere I want. And no, that's not going to happen. We want to make sure that our neighborhoods are kept safe. And if a fire truck needs to get in there, they can get in there, and keep our residents and visitors safe.
Absolutely. And I think that's the big picture here is keep everybody safe. Try to make your program functional, build out your ordinances in a way that, again, kind of the do no harm mentality. And that's not an easy thing to do at all. And Gus, the insight that you were able to contribute today from your experiences is so valuable. And it just kind of shows why you are, a really good model for how you started at stage one and how you got to where you are today, where it's kind of smooth sailing. So in wrapping, is there any other tips or things that you'd like to share with our group today that we didn't already cover?
No, I think y'all covered pretty much everything. I mean, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anybody has. I've always been of the mindset of why invent the wheel, reinvent the wheel. Probably there's ordinances out there, and I'd be more than happy to share ours as public record as to what our current ordinances are. And I'm sure long term, we're probably going to be tweaking and massaging those if we find loopholes and gaps, and just like any other ordinance. They're never going to be 100%.
Yeah. No doubt. And that's really the value in having colleagues in cities and counties near you that you're able to go to because they've been there and you haven't been there yet, and they have good advice. So with that, we are going to have a Q&A session. But quickly before we get to that, I just want to kind of preview, we will have a part 2 to this. This was a focus on ordinances and how to kind of some tips to build out good ordinances and how to decide what is important to your city when it comes to your ordinances. But our follow-up to this is going to go a little deeper into compliance. So we're going to talk about monitoring and identifying those properties, the administrative support that it takes to run your program, even auditing, discovery, recovery, and we'll touch on reporting and analytics, which is also a very vital part of full governance. So stay tuned, more details to come on that. And with that, I'll pass this back over to our lovely host, Corrine, and she's going to open our Q&A session.
Thank you both so much. That was great. You guys did a great job taking us through all the different stages. You covered a lot of ground. I know I learned a lot. So we learned about the importance of STR ordinances and making sure that they get communicated to the public. In Gus, it sounded like you tried a variety of different ways, and it sounds like you just can't communicate them enough.
Yeah. One of the best, not because y'all are hosting this, but y'all have been incredible partners in this. I've learned a lot going through the process with y'all and making our workflows the way they need to be. No two cities are the same, and y'all have been great to work with to make sure that our needs are being met as far as what we need to do. And dovetailing with what we do with code enforcement, we want to kind of keep the same kind of general workflows. And the communication is key, and y'all have been great partners with us.
Well, thank you. And you are wonderful to work with. And you weren't kidding about being having that Gumby model, because I know you've shared it with us before. So,
Yeah.
And you're extremely flexible and just a joy to work with. But Brandy and Gus, thank you also for covering just all the various tips and like different aspects to think about when developing an ordinance and making sure it fits for your community, because it's not a cookie cutter type of situation. You know, all communities are different and may have different priorities, and so I thought you guys did a great job covering that.
Thank
Oh,
you.
and making sure it has teeth. So that was a big
Yeah.
takeaway that I know I heard.
Yeah.
It is important.
Yeah, because I mean, having an ordinance that you can't enforce, why bother with the ordinance?
Right. So let's move into some questions that have been coming in during the presentation. So, guys, are you ready?
We'll try.
Hopefully.
All right. So Gus, this first one is for you. Can you provide me with some current ordinance and or standard operating procedures that you've incorporated in College Station?
Yeah, I mean, if anybody wants, I can either email them to you. They're pretty set as to work for us. Doesn't mean they'll work for you, but at least they'll give you a good. Whoever's asking will give you a good framework to look at. One of the things that we did was we kind of the letters that were going out. We wanted to simplify them as much as possible with the experience that we have with the long-term rental registration program that we have. Is at the beginning it was a 2-page letter for the long-term ones, and we said once you get past the first paragraph, you're done reading. I mean, everybody has a short memory span, so being able to work and massage the letters that go out that y'all send out for us for the first touch with the with those short-term rentals that you find was very much appreciated, and that's something that some cities they want to go and hit hard, and some cities want to go okay, let's be gentle and iron fist or velvet glove instead of iron fist kind of mentality. It all depends. You know your city better than anybody. You know your residents better than anybody. So.
Right.
So when you say short, how short is short? Like what's that sweet spot?
It's basically it's almost a half pager. It's saying, hey, you've been identified as a short-term rental, and a lot of it's the tone of the letters. And I think the ones that we have now are just in the right spot, and they're changeable. We say, hey, you know what? We're getting a lot of questions about this. Can you add that in there? Or I think this is too much for them. And I've always been great about making those modifications for us.
So I can imagine that tone's very important. What type of tone do you use? Do you keep it friendly and informative? What do you strive for?
Yeah. We give them the justification for the ordinance. This is why. I know with originally with, and again, I keep going back to our long-term, but the long-term rental registration program, a lot of them didn't understand why we were asking them. And then we tell them stories. Do you want to be contacted in case there's something happening at your property that you need to know about? You had a break-in with Ice Storm Uri that came through here early last year, February of last year. We had so many. We were below freezing for 10 days, and so when things started thawing out, our code officer would go out and see water pouring out of people's front doors, and no residents were here because it was during COVID. And so we were able to immediately call them and say, hey, you might want to send somebody out here because you're doing some damage to your property. Or with a short-term rental, you've got issues going on right now. There's a huge party going on in your property. And if you're local, or if we have the contact information for somebody close, within 30 miles, they can head over there and shut the thing down before we have to call PD, and it gets ugly. So being able to do that is justify why we're doing this. It's not, although it is, but it's not. It's about making sure that the revenue is being collected fairly with everybody else, but also taking care of your property. Us helping you take care of your investment that you have here in College Station,
which I'm sure all the residents appreciate.
Yeah, they do, and keeping the neighborhood integrity. I keep harping back on that, but that's the big thing.
So, Brandy, this next one's for you. What if we don't have any local ordinances in place? Can we still collect hotel occupancy tax from our STRs?
Well, I'll tell you, I do have this background, but if you looked at the actual law, there's not a law degree behind me. So I don't want to give out any legal advice here. But our understanding and the understanding of many of our clients and friends there in Texas is the state statute's been in place for the levying of occupancy tax. So the same laws that apply to your hotels and the way your hotels have been operating for decades, those same laws apply to short-term rental properties. So yes, they still have an occupancy tax levied on them. And as a collector, you still are able to collect it. The only reason that the ordinances are so important is because sometimes it gives you the roadmap to do the outreach and to let them know what's expected of them and encourage registration. But you are under the state occupancy tax umbrella when it comes to your short-term rental occupancy tax.
Got it. So speaking of taxes, so this may delve right into our next one. So thank you, Brandy. So Gus,
Mhm.
what's College Station's fee structure, and how did y'all come up with the numbers?
Cost recovery, that's part of what we have to do. And then we came up with something that we thought was pretty fair. Let me pull it up here. The permit fee is $100, and then to get the inspection done is $100, and you can fail the inspection as many times you want, but each time you have it re-inspected, it's another, and I don't know where they came up with this, but $104. The renewal fee is $75 every year, and then it's valid from 1 year from the date of issuance and must be renewed. And it covers our costs, and it's something that I think most people that are short-term rental go, yeah, that sounds fair. It's not $1,000. There's not something ridiculous that's gonna say, well, it's not worth it. Uh, you know,
So
short-term.
when you say cover, I'm sorry, Brandy.
Oh, no, just stemming from Gus's statement there, I wanted to just add kind of a second later that when you were talking about your renewals, it is a 12-month renewal cycle. So if they renew in February, if they get their license in February, they're going to renew the following February. And I'm thinking through that, it staggers your renewal season throughout the year rather than having a January to December.
Yes.
Like everybody renews in December. Is that better for you?
Yes, because we learned that through our long-term rental where it was year to year. If you got your license in November, it was only good until the end of the year, which would be December. And then in December, January, come January 15th, we'd have to send out 4,000 or 5,000 letters saying, hey, you need to renew. And that was just overwhelming. There's no way you can do that. So by staggering them out, it kind of spreads the renewal process for us. Even though we've got 260-ish, give or take now, it's still, we expect that number to grow. And having the level of compliance that we have now, I think we're pretty comfortable in the way the process is working for us.
So Gus, I wanted to go back on something you just said. You mentioned that you wanted to collect, it was to cover costs, So can you speak exactly what you're covering the cost to? So to administer the program?
It's basically the administering on our end of the process. Once y'all do all the sounds horrible, but all the grunt work for us and the time consuming work that God bless your algorithms, whoever wrote them, because that was killing our staff. And literally we were for weeks, we do nothing but try to go out there, and we would only hit the big websites. We didn't know that there was an SEC one. We didn't know that there was a A&M Mothers something or other that was doing short-term rentals just for Texas A&M University. And so for us, it's more administering the program on our side, the software, paying for part of what y'all do for us, but also once we get to code enforcement, what we think the cost is based on man hours and of actually enforcing the ordinance.
So it's a win-win for everything.
Mm-hmm. It is
happy, residents are happy, costs are covered. Sounds like a good program altogether.
And again, it's the return on investment is it's great. I mean, it's just great, and it frees up our staff to do their other duties as assigned.
So here's a different twist and a different question. I'm going to throw it first to Brandy, and Gus certainly comment if you'd like to. Is partnering with Airbnb a good idea?
My opinion is it is not a good idea. And I'll tell you some of the experiences that we've heard from cities in Texas that have done that. The results are not very good. You may get, through that partnership, you may get a payment, a lump sum payment that has limited reconciliation. So you can't really tie those payments to a particular property record. You don't really know what they're for. There's just a lot of people that list on other platforms
Mhm.
outside of Airbnb. So you would have to have 125 agreements in place really to even kind of cover the web, all the sites that are on the web. So do you? We have some clients that did that and regretted it
Yeah.
afterwards. So do you have that in place, or have you ever had that or considered that, guys? What
No,
was your
because
thought?
the exact same thing that you said, you can't hit all 125 of them. I mean, you hit Airbnb and you say, oh, no, Airbnb doesn't want, they want to play or they don't want to play. Then the property owner is going to go to another website or take it down off of that website and sneak it off onto another one. So
Yeah.
it's tough. It'd be like saying, I don't know, I can't even come up with an analogy that would say, you can't cover all your bases. There's no way.
Yeah, it's like chasing
Yeah,
squirrels.
it would be. And then God bless your algorithm. I don't know how it works, but it's amazing.
And here's another one that I'm going to throw to both of you. Brandy, so I'll let you start. How are cities driving enforcement after ordinances are put in place? Brandy?
It's a really good question, and we did kind of touch on some of the things that we're seeing as common mechanisms. You can impose fines. Um, you can not renew the permit. You can revoke a permit. So there are several mechanisms in place, and there's also what's a really important piece of this, which we didn't touch on today. It will be in the part two of this, is the audit program. So that's another way to really go in and kind of build a case with evidence, with financials and stuff. So that's my opinion. I'm not a city leader, guys. What is your I mean, for code enforcement, what are some of the common things that you're having to go out and take enforcement measures
Well,
on?
I think the cease and desist is, which we haven't had to do, luckily. Usually, when we notify them or we write the first summons or citation, they get it. It hits them in the pocketbook, and
Hmm.
they go, "Oh, okay, so I do have to register." Or either that, or take it off. And then if it comes, that same property pops up on with the biweekly list that y'all send us to say, "Here's the ones that we found this last 2 weeks." Then we go out and write them another immediate citation, and then the judge takes that into account as far as what the fine is going to be for them. And then if it gets to the point where they don't want to play anymore, then cease and desist, and then we'll start. Our ordinance is written that we can go in and actually fine them for every instance that they lease the property without being short-term rental. And luckily, we haven't had to do that yet, but they under the teeth. That's the important thing in getting in your ordinance. The teeth that you need to make sure that it's being enforced and followed.
It's like parenting.
Yeah,
It's all
exactly.
follow up.
You have your good kids and you have your bad kids, and yeah.
So here's a great question that both of you have touched on, but I don't think we actually need a little bit more information about. How do I know how many short-term rentals I have in my city? Is there a resource to give me an idea?
You could go to Airbnb and do a Google search and see where that gets you. I
Yeah.
say that facetiously because that's not a good way. Honestly, there are um, tools in place through third party vendors like Avenue and others
Mhm.
that actually they're very very robust tools to go out and do data scrapes on the websites and determine the number of listings that fall within your jurisdiction. That's the key part. So anyone that's on this call that may have interest in, just from a high level, to know if you have 10 STRs or 500 STRs in your city, you can reach out to me personally or any Avenue staff, and we are able to run you a dashboard and show you the real data that applies to your city and in regards to the number of properties that you have listing, the average nightly rates, things like that. So definitely, if that's something that anyone on the call is interested in learning more about, definitely reach out to us. We can get that to you.
And when you say a data scrape, that's not just for one website. That's for the 125 plus websites you were talking about earlier, correct?
That is correct.
So the software then goes through like on a routine basis, like all the different sites.
Yeah, and that's the algorithm that I was talking about, because our admins were going through just the big 2, 3, 4 of them that we knew about, but there's so many of them out there that there's no way. There's absolutely no way to catch them all.
Absolutely.
And having a service that will do that for us and do the grunt work, that's the heavy lift for us, is getting that taken care of.
Well, great. So people are already populating cities they'd like a dashboard for. So we will follow up and we will get you that heat map for your area. But we are at the top of the hour right now, so we're at the top of our webinar hour. So that brings us to a close. I want to thank Brandy and Gus so much for your time today. Your insights and real world examples were fabulous, and just grateful for the time and your dedication that you gave us today. And a big thanks to our audience. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you found this webinar helpful and informative. Please keep an eye out for that next webinar Brandy was talking about. We plan on having it in May about compliance and administration. So we will send out information about that. And if you have any questions until then, please reach out to us. We're going to share Brandy's information on the screen here and how to reach out to us. Until then, have a fantastic day and take care.
Thanks.